Good afternoon. It is Friday. It's not 10 o'clock though. It's later. You might have noted that as we are doing our Talk to a Farmer Friday. But we started later to accommodate our guest today. Our guest today is George Frisvold from the University of Arizona Extension. And he's a rock star in the world of ag economics. So I thought, in this futurist series that I'm doing, it only makes sense that I should ask George Frisvold, who crunches the numbers all the time, what's going on. So thank you, Jay Bolivar 2001, for joining. We're doing our Talk to a Farmer Friday, and I'm actually bringing on a professor from the University of Arizona, our land-grant university, George Frisvold, and we're going to talk about numbers, we're going to talk about the economy, we're going to talk about Arizona agriculture's future. So stay tuned. This is going to be an exciting one. Give me a chance to bring in my guest, George Frisvold, from the University of Arizona Extension. And he's a rock star. He's always crunching some interesting. So I've invited him. Let's give him a chance to come on and we'll go from there. This is actually the fourth of an 8-part series on the future of Arizona agriculture. And George is my next guest. Hi, George.
Hi, it works great now.
Yay! Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. We've already got a few people that are online with us. And in fact, for those of us joining us live, feel free to post a question in the comments and we'll try to answer it. There's some economic numbers that George will probably be able to tell you off the top of his head, but the USDA Ag Census just came out last Tuesday, I think it was, or maybe the week before. And so we still have to crunch some numbers on those before we can do too much of an assessment, but here goes. So as I've told you, George, and you're fully aware of, we're doing this, what I call the future of Arizona agriculture. And I picked you as one of my Aggie futurists is what I'm calling everyone. I bet you've never had that title thrown at you before, but
No.
I'm going to launch right into it. So we're still in the fairly early part of 2024, and we kind of like to make predictions. So when you look out, when you try to look at your fuzzy crystal ball, what do you see as the future of Arizona agriculture?
Oh, well, I think there's like the fundamental structure of Arizona agriculture, and parts of it are very, very resilient. Parts of it are more vulnerable. If you look, like in Yuma, the vegetable producing areas, that's extremely efficient. Nobody can really supply winter vegetables the way Yuma can. And when you're economists, we run simulations, and they're almost like you can do like disaster scenarios. It's like how bad would certain situations have to get for Yuma to not be a big, agricultural production center. And you could make shocks in the model you would never do to anybody in real life. But even with very, very negative shocks, Yuma is incredibly resilient. It's going to be a center of vegetable production, and it's hard to come up with any kind of realistic economic scenario where it's not.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear, the resiliency of the Yuma economy, especially the Yuma ag economy. But you also mentioned a little bit earlier some that maybe are a little bit more vulnerable. Dare to even identify some of those specifics. And hey, Chaos Farmer, thank you for joining us as always. You're one of my best fans. I appreciate it.
Sure, and I think where it's hard is for people who are historically getting water from the Central Arizona Project from the Colorado River, and those supplies are going away, and it's still up in the air about what the size of those reductions are going to be. But there are definitely starting to be reductions, and they're going to get larger, and so that's going to produce certain challenges for people in the center of the state. and I think it's going to be a lot harder for them to adjust elsewhere. Other parts of the state where there's going to be challenges in the future is sorting out groundwater and how that's going to get managed. So there's two kinds of agriculture. There's ones that are hooked up to all the Bureau of Rec plumbing, and they're relying, relatively more on surface water. And you have the ones that are just pretty much all reliant on groundwater. And so managing groundwater locally is going to be a future challenge. Dealing with water cuts in the center of the state are going to be a challenge. I think, in the center of the state, tribal agriculture has won these water settlements, and they have land that can be turned into agriculture. They're not going to face the same kind of urban building pressure that other parts of central Arizona will face. So I think there's prospects for future collaboration between different agricultural producers, and more happening things going on in tribal agriculture, I think, over the next 20 years.
Awesome. Yes, because they have the land and they have the water, and we certainly should maximize on these, to your point, collaborative relationships in order to ensure that continues. We've got a really amazing heritage and a neat history, just to line it up with, the state, the largest number of Native American tribes in the state. We have the largest number of Native American farmers in the state. When we finally started counting those subsistence farmers on the tribal lands, a lot of them are growing for themselves and their neighbors and also their ceremonial corn. We more than doubled our numbers, our farm numbers. So there's a significant aspect to it, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Very, very intriguing. Again, just to let everyone know that's joined us, this is the fourth of an 8-part series. I've secured 4 more after you, George, futurists, Aggie futurists, about where they see Arizona agriculture going in the next couple decades. So we're kind of excited about that. And KCS Florals, thanks for joining us. So the next question is, again, from your perspective as a U of A economist in extension, what do you feel are the most pressing issues in Arizona besides water? I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about water anyway.
Yeah.
But, so what's your take on all that?
I think, again, there's policy uncertainty, which is kind of sharper now. I mean, farmers, and ranchers are used to weather uncertainty or price volatility, but we don't have like an annual federal budget. We don't have a farm bill, and it's not clear at what point we're going to have a new farm bill. There's uncertainty about whether we're going to, in a couple of years, ramp up tariffs again, and have another trade war. And, tariffs and trade wars hurt farmers in 2 ways. One, tariffs are basically taxes, and tariffs on imports tax the inputs that farmers use.
Sure.
So if you start slapping on tariffs, farm machinery is going to be more expensive. Pesticides are going to be more expensive. Fertilizer is going to be more expensive. Energy is going to be more expensive. And so that's on the cost side. On the demand side, if we put tariffs on countries and they retaliate and put tariffs on agricultural commodities, then farmers get hurt because their export sales and their overall income falls. So a trade war, new rounds of trade war would be a problem. Not having a farm bill is a problem. And again, with water, you can't talk in Arizona without getting back to water pretty soon. There's been, plans and deals and programs to deal with Colorado River shortages kind of up until 2026. And so what happens after 2026 is also highly uncertain.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, and I never thought of that, but this whole policy uncertainty can have a huge impact on our future and that's not just Arizona, but nationally, you're indicating a farm bill that still hasn't been enacted, and that's very intriguing. I never thought of it that way, and that's so important.
And again, growers are used to volatility. They know, prices are going to be high, prices are going to cost, but and you kind of can understand how markets are going to drive that. But with the policy stuff, a lot of it is really like, who knows?
Right.
And I think that's
Right.
more challenging.
Yeah, very, very good point. I appreciate that one. And you know what's been so interesting about this series, like I said, you're the fourth I've interviewed on the future of Arizona agriculture. And every one of you has had a very insightful perspective on some of these issues that are going to be so important to us. So my next question is, you've been with the U of A, our land grant university, for quite some time. So you can kind of think about the setting and the environment. What would I Am I right to say you've been there almost 20 years?
More than 20 years.
More than 20 years?
Yeah.
So you can kind of look back, and in looking back, how would you bridge the future? What stands out to you about trying to prepare for the future?
I mean, two very hopeful things for me that make me optimistic is just new technology, but then also kind of movements in terms of cooperation. I'm thinking I came here in the mid 90s, and in the mid 90s, if you had told people cotton production will be a low pesticide crop, people would have laughed. That was like, oh, cotton is, they use all these pesticides. And the IPM efforts, through the University of Arizona and through
Right.
cooperative extension have been amazing.
And
I mean,
for the IPM is our insect pest
the
management, or
integrated pest management.
right, integrated pest management. Yeah.
And the idea of integrated pest management is that you want to control the pests. And a shorthand way to say it is like you don't want to put $10 per acre on a crop to stop pest damage. It's $2 per acre. So you want to
Right.
know biological systems. So the public sector and the private sector developed a whole host of better pest control technologies that were a lot more environmentally benign. And so that reduced environmental impacts of pesticide use. You could also use less because it wasn't disrupting biological systems. And so you have this combination of both private sector and public sector research bringing new technologies, online and making them available and testing them and improving them. At the same time, a lot of pest control involved grower cooperation, that they had to do things in common to control these pests and do things in common to prevent resistance from developing to pests. And they've been incredibly successful at doing that. There's, again, a lot fewer pesticides are applied than they used to be. And I think that's a model of, okay, if you have the science behind what's going on and you can show growers, yes, this method will work, then they'll embrace it. If they see
Right.
the numbers, if they can test it out, they're very, very innovative. And in things where everybody has to come together in common, it's like, okay, this program will work better if we all do it together. And everybody, for the most part, people did. And it's been incredibly successful. And that combination of better scientific information and kind of local grower cooperation, I think, could carry over into other things like groundwater. I mean, you wouldn't say, well, how's pest control like groundwater? It's what's going on, I think, holding off a lot of debates and resolution about what to do with groundwater is that people don't have the scientific information about what's going on with water tables in rural areas. And I think if you present to people locally, okay, these are the consequences of your actions. These are things we all have to do collectively. If the science can give people a way to, okay, we have to adjust, we have to figure out a way how we're going to organize ourselves. And I think when people see that, there's actions that they can take that's going to make agriculture more sustainable, they'll take it.
Right. Yeah. So cool. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. And I can, by the way, Foodie Feet Sink, I like that name. Thanks for joining. Brett Hale, hello, Brett Hale. And then Ramsey, also Zona Struble, and okay, and then Ram just had a question for it. Oh yes, this is going to be recorded. I posted on Instagram. I also posted on Facebook, and we're going to develop a system where we also upload these to YouTube. So yes, if you have to leave, this will be posted. In fact, all of our 8-part series on the future of Arizona agriculture is going to be posted. So good question, and thanks for asking it. And so for those that have joined us, if you want to ask Dr. Frisvold a question, feel free to. He's our economist. I call him part of the lead of the A team for U of A's economic team. And I just love quizzing Dr. Frisvold because there's always so much I learn. And I can give my dad's example. So when you develop these integrated pest management, and then also he also incorporated biotech cotton. He said, Julie, well over, because I asked him that so that I could make it part of a story I was doing. He said, well over 90% of my pesticide application has been reduced because of integrated pest management practices that I instituted, because to your point, Dr. Frisvold, that public-private, and then, you've got biotech cotton, and there's just so many things that farmers will institute if the researchers like yourself will do the research to help them. And some of that research is too expensive for them to handle. So we lean very heavily, I know our family did, and we haven't been farming since 2004. We leaned very heavily on the U of A. And Dad actually was also the manager of the U of A Big Mac farms. I know you know that. And the professors used to tell him, yeah, can we try some of our experiments on University, I think they called it University South or Big Mac South or something, on his own farm. So we've always fully celebrated, fully embraced that. And Dad is just one anecdotal example of it. So I think you kind of already answered the hopeful question, which is, you said you feel hopeful about the future of agriculture because of these technology discoveries, these public-private partnerships with the land-grant university, U of A, and all that stuff. But can you expand on your hopefulness about Arizona's agriculture's future?
Sure. I mean, when desert ag is very, very productive, and I don't know if this segues into it, but we were doing a study looking at water use across the entire Colorado basin, and we were comparing counties, in terms of how much they were getting out of the water they were using. And people often, will vilify crops. They'll say, "Oh, this uses a lot of water per acre," and you hear this in the news. You go like, "Why are we growing crops in the desert?" Right? Because it uses so much water. And it's like, well, we're growing crops in the desert because people like to eat vegetables in the winter.
Right.
There's one reason. The other reason is that, well, there's lots of people who live in arid, warm areas, and would you tell them, "Oh no, don't grow any of your own food. Get it from somewhere else"? You wouldn't do that all throughout the world.
Right.
And another thing is that desert agriculture is actually really, really productive. You get a lot of output per unit of land too. And one of the things we did was we were looking at, you could look at this, it's a ratio. You could look at it one way or another. One is to look at how much money do you get per acre foot? So what's the value of ag production that you can get out of an acre foot of water? And one of the things we found was that the dollar revenue you could get in the lower basin, which is mostly Arizona, but also some of Southern California, the revenue you get per acre foot is about 6 times higher than what it is in the upper basin.
Wow.
So it's terms of like, what's the value if I get per acre? And you could also flip that around, right? It's a ratio. It's like, how much water does it take to generate, let's say, $1,000 worth of revenue? And again, in the lower basin, it's 6 times less. So
Wow.
if you said, I want to generate $1,000 worth of crops, how much water would I need? And it's a lot lower in Arizona than it is in the upper basin. And again, along the Colorado main stem, along the border counties in Arizona, it's water per dollar is actually even lower than that.
Wow.
So one of the things that tells us is, as water gets more scarce and people talk about moving water away from agriculture to other uses, as population grows in the West, as industrial demand grows in the West, going after Arizona water would be actually the most expensive in terms of what you'd be giving up in terms of the value of ag production.
Wow.
Another way to look at that is like, well, where are you going to look for water that has relatively low returns? It's not in most of Arizona.
Right.
And so if you look at what's going to happen in the region, I mean, we've seen this over time. It's just history that as time goes on, more water goes to like urban uses, less goes to ag. But Arizona is highly productive, so agriculture is going to stay here even with all the pressures.
Wow.
The structure may change, but other parts of the basin, I think, are going to have a much harder time adapting than we will.
Yeah, and so a layman's way to interpret that, and we have your study coming out. I've done a conversation article with you. It'll appear in the March issue of Arizona Agriculture. For those that want a copy of that, it's for our ag members. We do eventually post it on the website, but it's an amazing, and I walked away from reading your answers, and all I could say was wow, just wow. So the point being, in layman's terms, is the value that we can produce with the water that we use, and we use a lot less water because of our efficiencies, is just, it's kind of through the roof.
Yeah, and in that article you said, well, what surprised you?
Yeah.
What was surprising? And like, I knew that it's like, yeah, Arizona agriculture is really efficient at using water. They get a lot out of the water that they use. And I knew that that was relatively high. And I think, a lot of growers have a sense of, we're pretty efficient, and they're in a desert environment. So water, crops need more water per acre, but they get a lot out of the water they use. And I had a sense that it was higher in Arizona than in a lot of the rest of the basin, and the value you get out of the water using is higher. But I was really surprised by the magnitude of how much higher it is.
Can you,
Like,
just because some of the people that have joined us today maybe aren't members of Arizona Farm Bureau, but by the way, for those that have joined us, that's why you should be a member of Arizona Farm Bureau. Can you give away don't you have a ratio?
Yeah, it's like
something like,
yeah, it's like 6 times higher.
wow,
Yeah.
6 times higher than most of the other basin states, with the exception of California, correct?
Well, we broke it down by county. And so for California, we just looked at, I think we just looked at Imperial and Riverside County.
Okay.
And those are up there. But then like the rest of the basin is, it's part of Wyoming, part of Utah, part of Colorado, part of New Mexico, a little bit of Nevada, but Nevada doesn't have much ag. But yeah, but Arizona is like 6 times higher than the upper basin.
Yeah.
And again, there's fights between the lower basin and the upper basin about who's going to get how much Colorado River water. And You have the lower basin is just so much more productive. So if you want, if someone's kind of making an argument about, okay, we should have cuts in water where it's not going to affect regional ag production, then, you don't want to hit regional ag production, then you would look elsewhere for water than
Right.
Arizona.
Right. Ben Mingus, thanks for joining us. Ben is the president for Yuma, or I said Yuma. It's because we've been talking about Yuma. For Graham County Farm Bureau. And Ben and his wife, Ashley, just won the Excellence in Ag Award in the national level in the Young Farm and Rancher competition. They were runners up, which placed them second out of the top 10. So speaking of that agriculture efficiency, we've got some amazing Aggies here in the state of Arizona. And to that point, so Ben and Ashley are ranchers. So their breeding and genetics programming over the last couple of decades has even improved efficiencies, not only on the weight gain for our beef, but they can endure and handle drought. We've got cattle out there on our rangelands that know how to handle our low water use environment. So it's another way. It may be a little bit different, but it's another way that we can highlight how efficient we've become in agriculture with our agriculture and our use of water. So, and we've had some great joiners, and I know you have a 2 o'clock, but I do have a final question. And my last question was about the Basin States research. That's, again, for those that are members of the Arizona Farm Bureau, that's going to come out in the March issue of Arizona Agriculture. That will drop the first week in your mailbox. But I've been talking to Dr. George Frisvold with University of Arizona Extension. He's an economist that's constantly crunching the numbers, and he's somebody I lean on heavily to kind of get an insight about the efficiencies and how awesome our agriculture here is in the state of Arizona. So you make me hopeful about the future of Arizona agriculture. But our Census of Ag numbers just came out. Give us some hope about, and that census only occurs every 5 years for those that have joined us, and you might not know that, versus the regular census, which is every 10 years. We showed from 2017 to 2022 in this latest census that we've lost a couple thousand farmers and ranchers, and we've lost something like 600,000 acres. Now, I did figure out that cropland, of that 600,000, 64,000 is cropland. But give us some hope about that, because it's where I think, oh my gosh.
With those numbers, you have to be careful.
Okay.
Because the Census of Ag counts as farms, any farm with the capacity to have $1,000 worth of sales.
So the benchmark is kind of low.
Right. So, you go, oh, $1,000. It's like, that's someone's 4-H project almost. And so what's deceptive is and again, if you look at the shrinkage of the number of farm operations, it's these people who are listed as they have less than $1,000 in sales. They have less than $5,000 or $10,000 in sales. And I'm kind of puzzled about who those folks are.
Okay.
Are they hobby farms, things like that? In terms of but they account for a very, very tiny amount of the state's agricultural production.
Okay.
And so, but one of the deceptive things about the census numbers, because you have all these, call them small fry, with the more, kind of like people you would think of, okay, this is a farm, this is a going operation, that you've got these kind of micro hobby farms thrown into the mix, that it throws off the average numbers.
Okay.
And so the averages don't really, it would be like you had a dinner party and then I don't know, Elon Musk walks into the room and you go, okay, what's the average income of everybody in here? It throws it off.
Okay. I get that.
The averages don't match kind of most people's, experience. And so
Okay.
you've got to be a little careful. That's why, like, you had asked me about the numbers before, and I said you have to get under the hood and see, well, how this is affecting most things. Now, if you look at like the aggregate production numbers, the aggregate sales values between the last census and this one, things look pretty good. There's definitely
Okay.
been growth. Um, you see some irrigated acres coming out of central Arizona, and that's kind of the first things you see in terms of less cap water being available, and that's always a frustrating thing with the census numbers, is because like it came out this year February 13th with great fanfare. It's like, okay, now we have the numbers for 2022.
Yeah.
And so we're always kind of looking in the rear view mirror.
It's true. It
And
is true.
so, but again, the census numbers show, there's more pressure on acreage in the center of the state than elsewhere.
Okay.
But at the same time, sales revenues, are up. And again, a lot of, kind of micro level operations have gone by the wayside. And, but you don't know whether those combined bigger ones or not. So
Okay.
the productive capacity of the state, hasn't changed that much.
Okay. A while ago, it was about maybe almost a year ago, I asked Dr. Silvertooth, one of your colleagues. I even said, because we're a $23.3 billion industry, I asked him, I said, do you think that number will be lower? And he goes, Julie, in some ways, I actually think it could be higher. So I'm hoping.
Yeah, well,
But I'm
yeah,
asking him a crystal ball question, and
yeah.
that's not always fair.
I mean, we're what we're hoping to like undertake to actually come up with newer numbers from that. And I think I think they'll be larger. Again, ag production is has grown over time. Again, when we did those first calculations, we were also including like value added stuff, like more food
Sure.
processing. And,
Okay. Yeah.
and right, because that's part of the whole food system too.
Right.
And so that value added stuff has grown a fair bit in the state. When you add that to the numbers, that's going to go up. So
Awesome.
yeah, I would expect those numbers to be higher now.
Okay. That's very encouraging. Like I said, Dr. Frisvold, you're giving me a lot of hope, and I am encouraged by that. And I'm going to use your dinner analogy. If I had the privilege of
Sure.
inviting Elon Musk
Yeah,
and he came, I'd say, okay, what's the average
yeah,
income here? He would skew it.
yeah.
Okay. So I really appreciate this. Your article comes out in March. And thank you so much for your input and insights on that. And for those that joined us on the live, just know that I'm going to post this to Instagram and also Facebook. And then we're going to get to where we're posting these on Facebook or YouTube, because so many people have asked us for them. And we do have a Arizona Farm Bureau YouTube account. And then in the meantime, let's stay in touch, Dr. Frisvold, because I'm going to keep asking you questions about numbers.
Okay, sure enough.
All
Well, it's
right.
been a pleasure.
All right. Be blessed and enjoy your weekend.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye-bye.